All roads converge. On Julian Assange. Episode 7. In previous episodes we covered the crucifixion of Julian Assange and the banality of evil, as well as 3 parts of the section on modern-day heretics, looking at heretics on COVID-19, on the Holocaust, and on regime change wars, which took up 2 episodes. The second focused on Ukraine. We now look at heretics on the climate crisis. In a 2020 speech in Sydney, shown in episode 1, Father Dave alluded to Dorothea McKellar's most famous poem, written in 1904, describing her beloved Australia. I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains, of ragged mountain ranges, of droughts and flooding rains. This poem describes the Australian vicissitudes of drought, flood and wildfire in what the poet calls a willful, lavish land, without any thought of there being a climate crisis. In my next series I will examine environmental destruction, and the concept usually associated with that, the climate crisis, in considerable detail. Here, I simply want to note that those who have fought hard to publish the details of the pollution and poisoning of our natural environment, the very air, water, and soil on which humanity and other living creatures rely for survival, so that those responsible can be stopped, and even punished, fare no better than dissidents against regime change wars, or public health fascism. Robert Kennedy Jr., the founder of Children's Health Defense, and so currently thought of as a dissident on the official COVID-19 narrative and matters related to vaccines, was first and foremost a campaigner and very successful legal advocate for clean water, fighting against the very many ways our waterways and oceans are being poisoned, usually by big business. He has also been active in the fight against neurotoxins and other toxic chemicals, used routinely in modern agricultural practices, most notably Monsanto's use of glyphosate in their product Roundup. For his trouble, he has been cancelled by the legacy press, and largely banned from social media. A parallel case. Stephen Donziger. One case of a dissenter in the fight against the current environmental crisis parallels the treatment of Julian Assange, right down to Ecuador having been a key actor in his drama, the irregular role of the judiciary, and the role of the legacy press, i.e. largely absent, but currently improving. That heretic is Stephen Donziger. An article on the 18th of March 2021 in Esquire, titled, I've been targeted with probably the most vicious corporate counterattack in American history, outlined what had happened to him to that point.
Donziger is a human rights lawyer who, for more than 27 years, has represented the indigenous peoples and rural farmers of Ecuador against Texaco, since acquired by Chevron, which was accused of dumping at least 16 billion gallons of toxic waste into the area of the Amazon rainforest in which they live. Cancer is now highly prevalent in the local population. Some have called it the Amazon Chernobyl. They first filed suit in New York in 1993, but Texaco lobbied, successfully, to move the proceedings to Ecuador. In 2011, the team of Ecuadorian lawyers Donziger worked with won the case, and Chevron was ultimately ordered to pay $9.8 billion. This image of then-President Rafael Correa appeared in the article.
But for Donziger, that was nowhere near the end. Chevron, a $260 billion company, went to a New York federal court to sue him under a lesser-known civil, non-criminal, provision of the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, or RICO, Act. They later dropped their demands for financial damages because it would have necessitated a jury trial. That is something Donziger has been unable to get. Instead, Judge Lewis Kaplan, a former corporate lawyer whose clients included tobacco companies, became Donziger's judge and jury in the RICO case. He heard from 31 witnesses, but based his ruling in significant part on the testimony of Albert Guerra, a former Ecuadorian judge, whom Chevron relocated to the U.S. at an overall cost of $2 million. Guerra alleged there was a bribe involved in the Ecuadorian court's judgment against Chevron. He has since retracted some of his testimony, admitting it was false.
But Kaplan, who refused to look at the scientific evidence in the original case, ruled the initial verdict was the result of fraud. And he didn't stop there. He ordered Donziger to pay millions in attorney's fees to Chevron, and eventually ordered him to turn over decades of client communications, even going after his phone and computer. Donziger considered this a threat to attorney-client privilege and appealed the ruling, but while that appeal was pending, Kaplan slapped him with a contempt of court charge for refusing to give up the devices. When the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York declined to prosecute the case, Kaplan took the extraordinary step of appointing a private law firm to prosecute Donziger, in the name of the U.S. government. The firm, Seward & Kissel, has had a number of oil and gas clients, including, in 2018, Chevron. Kaplan bypassed the usual, random case assignment procedure of the federal judiciary, and handpicked a judge to hear the contempt case. Loretta Preschka, a member of the Federalist Society, among whose major donors is Chevron. Preschka has, like Kaplan, rejected Donziger's request to have his trial heard by a jury of his peers. Both judges declined Esquire's request for comment on Donziger's cases, citing court policy. After this introduction, an interview follows. Question. It's almost like you're buried under these layers of procedural complaints that they've made. Obviously, at the root of it, it's that Chevron is angry about the initial judgment. But now it's not even just the case, or about whether you supposedly behaved improperly in the initial case. Now it's about whether you fought the subsequent case in a way that they deem improper. Donziger. Yeah, that is accurate. I mean, they are trying to claim everything I do is somehow improper. Or part of a larger criminal scheme. When in reality, what I do is represent clients who have been the victims of a mass industrial poisoning by Chevron, and who were successful in winning a court judgment. So Chevron has paid massive sums of money as part of a demonization campaign, targeting me. All of these things they're doing to me are part of that campaign. What they try to do is use the law, and weaponize it to criminalize activism. And I'm Exhibit A.
On the 28th of April 2022, Craig Murray, who has also been treated in a totally irregular way, including being jailed by the judicial system in Scotland, also for contempt of court, commented on Donziger's plight, publishing an article titled, "Donziger, A Tale for Our Times."
For all these reasons, the Donziger case has been described as the first private criminal prosecution by a corporation in U.S. history. Chevron's ability to control the entire judicial and legal process has been terrifying. Every public affairs NGO you can think of, not in the pockets of big oil and their version of climate change denial, has raised serious concerns about the case. Contrary to convention, though not contrary to law, Kaplan also personally appointed the judge to hear the case for criminal breach of his order, rather than leaving it to the court system. His nominee, Judge Loretta Preschka, committed Donziger to house arrest pending trial. On October 21, 2021, she sentenced Donziger to 6 months in prison, the maximum for contempt of court in the USA. I was sentenced to 8 months in Scotland. After 45 days, Donziger was released from prison due to COVID, to serve the rest of his sentence under house arrest. In total, before and after trial, Donziger spent 993 days in detention. He was released 2 days ago. Donziger has been disbarred as a lawyer. Chevron have a lien on his home and all his assets, for compensation. They have paid nothing to the victims of their pollution of the Amazon. I really cannot think of any individual story that better incorporates so many aspects of the dreadful corruption of modern Western society. We are all, in a sense, the prisoners of corporations which dictate the terms on which we live, work, and share knowledge. Justice against the powerful appears impossible. It is profoundly disturbing, and I recommend everyone to take a few minutes to reflect about the full meaning of the Donziger story, in all its many tangents.
On the 9th of July 2022, Stephen Donziger and Craig Murray finally met, in an online conversation on Randy Credico's long-running program, Julian Assange, Countdown to Freedom. They discussed the parallels in all 3 trials, Donziger, Murray and Assange, including the toxic role of the legacy media, and the absence of a jury. What was not mentioned was that, in 2009, WikiLeaks had published a related case, censored in the media. The Trafigura case of toxic waste dumping on the Ivory Coast in Africa. According to a September 2009 UN report, the dumping drove 108,000 people in the Ivory Coast to seek medical attention. However, Craig Murray did describe his own observations, from his diplomatic stint in Nigeria, Africa, of outrageous pollution by petroleum firms, notably Shell, in the local environment, and of having been shushed by his boss for even asking questions about this matter. Plus Assange. On the day, the 17th of June 2022, the UK Home Secretary Priti Patel signed the extradition order for Julian Assange. Craig Murray tweeted,
Priti Patel's endorsement of the extradition of Julian Assange was a given. Now we finally get to take the real meat of the arguments on political extradition and freedom of speech to the High Court. The process, of course, is part of the punishment as Julian continues to rot.
The years Stephen Donziger spent under house arrest were many times greater than the eventual sentence, still being appealed, for what amounted to a virtual misdemeanor. In the conversation visited earlier, in the COVID-19 section, between unjabbed New Zealand midwives, mandated out of their employment and out of their careers, one midwife said,
"The COVID vaccine pass was nothing but a policy of discrimination. Purely from a scientific perspective, the purpose of the pass was to protect the vaccinated, under the guise that they couldn't transmit COVID once vaccinated. But that was not true. The science has shown us that you still catch and transmit COVID, even when you are fully vaccinated. So there was no basis, other than to nudge people to be vaccinated. The mandates were a punishment inflicted on people who, for whatever reason, did not comply. I struggle with the people in Parliament who were willingly doing that."
Punishments for COVID mandate dissenters, for protesting against COVID-19 edicts, came to a head in Canada after the Truckers' Freedom Convoy, where the Canadian government not only ensured that many were jailed, but also issued orders for banks to freeze the bank accounts of those contributing funds to the campaign, and even of their relatives. Gareth Peirce, Solicitor Extraordinaire for Julian Assange, is also the author of Dispatches from the Dark Side, a collection of essays written between 2007 and 2011. Before she trained as a lawyer, Peirce was a journalist, during which time she spent a lengthy period covering Martin Luther King Jr.'s campaign in the US. In these essays, Peirce documents some of the great failures of the system of justice in the UK and, in the context of cases related to extradition requests from the US, she comments, "The concept that its own conformity with international legal principles should be exposed to any outside judgment is entirely alien to America. When, for instance, the country of Jordan refused to endorse exemption for Americans from trial in the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, the US threatened immediately to withdraw its contribution of 1/5 of Jordan's annual budget. The Jordanian parliament promptly revoked its decision. The US is accustomed to filtering out external opinion. It will judge for itself whether or not it has," quoting the US Attorney General of the period, "adhered to all the rules, since it exempts itself from sanction when the politically driven choices it makes fail to comply with international standards." Gareth Peirce made many other relevant comments too, more than a decade ago. I heartily commend her book to readers. The world inside our heads. How we see the world, and what we then conclude about it, is dependent mainly on three key things. Firstly, the state of our body. Physically, chemically, since embodiment is a requirement for perception, as artificial intelligence researchers have found, to their chagrin. This is clear to us in some ways, such as the effect of natural hormonal changes on our perception, or the effect of various drugs. But it seems there is a more basic level at which it is also true. In a session titled, Talking with Russians, the Jordan B. Peterson podcast, on the 13th of January 2022, Peterson explains this at some length, quoting James Gibson, who notes that biologically, a value structure is the preconception for perception itself. Peterson explains,
We thought we just saw the objects that were there, the material objects that were there, but that isn't the case. It's really not the case. It's so much not the case that if you try to build a machine that perceives the world, that's just looking at the objects that are there, so to speak, you can't. It doesn't work. So people like Rodney Brooks, MIT robotics engineer, and a genius, he started figuring this out in 1992. That in all probability a machine would have to be embodied to perceive, because perception is so tightly associated with action, and action and perception are also so tightly associated with value. You can't perceive without a framework of values. They're a precondition for the perception of material reality itself.
This will be part of why prisons so carefully manage the physical state of their inmates. As John Shipton said of his son, Julian Assange, on the 16th of November 2021. Quote, "He has been vaccinated, of course, because all of the prisoners in the jail have been vaccinated. So he has no choice in this. No choice about anything. He has no control over his body. What his thoughts are his. The rest is in the complete control of the jail administration." End quote. But given this perspective, with such tight control of his physical state, perhaps even Julian's thoughts are no longer wholly his own. Secondly, how we see the world depends on the tools we have to encode and process our perceptions. These include visualization and, perhaps more importantly, at least for logical thinking, words and a grammar within which to arrange them. But now we are being asked to alter our vocabulary on an almost daily basis. Words that mean one thing one day mean something entirely different the next. More on this topic in a moment. Thirdly, it depends on the information to which we have access, including knowledge of its source and, often, knowledge of the motives of its provider. Our awareness of what information we don't have is also relevant. Before George Orwell gave us his commentary on the unsafe nature of knowledge grounded in words, in his novel 1984, and in his essays, such as Politics and the English Language, we had already been introduced to the insecure meanings of words, by Lewis Carroll. "I don't know what you mean by glory," Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. "Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant, there's a nice knockdown argument for you." "But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument," Alice objected. "When I use a word," Humpty Dumpty said, in rather a scornful tone, "it means just what I choose it to mean. Neither more nor less." "The question is," said Alice, "whether you can make words mean so many different things." "The question is," said Humpty Dumpty, "which is to be master, that's all." We used to laugh at Humpty Dumpty, and generally thought Orwell's dystopic 1984 unrealistically fanciful. But that was before. In our post-coronavirus world, the Alice adventures no longer seem amusing. And Orwell's Ministry of Truth no longer seems unrealistic. Indeed, it seems that the US Department of Homeland Security has created one already, although they called it a Disinformation Governance Board, something which only came to light when they tried to appoint a warbler named Nina Jankowicz as its head. As a precursor to the DHS Disinformation Governance Board, the Atlantic Council report, dated the 5th of March 2018, was published, at the height of the Russiagate propaganda, subsequently disproved by the Mueller inquiry. Here is the report cover, with WikiLeaks, who have never had to withdraw a document as fake, positioned at the center, along with Jack Posobiec, an American alt-right internet troll and conspiracy theorist, according to Wikipedia. The Atlantic Council make their enemy very clear. At the time it was noted that, in this outline of their strategy, straight from the horse's mouth, and filled with loads of doublethink, they explain how they want to build a global mini-truth system. But unlike in Orwell's 1984, it won't be monolithic, but distributed. Inside, It doesn't take them long to get into their Russia conspiracy theory. RT and Sputnik are noted as foreign propaganda, but of course the state-owned BBC are not. Nor is the role of US-owned propaganda organs mentioned. Rather than go into more depth here, I think the modern Ministry of Truth is rather well summed up in this song. How they rule you, how they fool you, how they cruel you.
WikiLeaks expose the fraud, the unreported crimes of war. But you don't really care for freedom, do ya? Without the sun, without fresh air, the governments don't seem to care. It's not okay, and this is how they rule ya. How they rule ya. How they fool ya. How they rule ya. How they rule ya. Julian has been here before. He's seen this crap and he's walked this floor. Try to wear him down, but he'll undo ya. One is silent about their wars. They rig the system and they flaunt the law. It's not okay. This is how they rule ya. How they rule ya. How they fool ya. How they rule ya. How they rule ya. Fans, they loved him so, and even gave him a Walkley Award. Who's there now for Julian? Can't hear. Want him now for espionage. Why should tell him the truth, get charged, and torture him? This is how they cruel ya. How they rule ya. How they fool ya. How they rule ya. How they rule ya. Celebrities are celebrated, knowing the truth is regulated. You never seem to care for honesty, do ya? Mainstream news, the number on you. Doesn't matter if it's all fake news. Please don't say, baby, this is how they rule ya. How they rule ya. How they fool ya. How they rule ya. They just fool. How they rule ya. How they fool ya. How they rule ya. They just fool. Yeah.
Here's a prophecy from Julian Assange a decade ago from his book Cypherpunks, in 2012. The world is not sliding, but galloping, into a new transnational dystopia. This development has not been properly recognized outside of national security circles. It has been hidden by secrecy, complexity, and scale. The Internet, our greatest tool of emancipation, has been transformed into the most dangerous facilitator of totalitarianism we have ever seen. The Internet is a threat to human civilization. He did not become more optimistic as time went on. In January 2018, he sent a related, written, message to a conference on organizing resistance to Internet censorship. Within that message, he called the efforts of corporations to control Internet discourse an existential threat to humanity.